bit of a dedication, I think. Today is Rosh Chodesh Nisan, as everybody knows. So it's right that we are concentrating our minds on things to do with Pesach. And probably there is nothing that gets people more het up about Pesach than Kitniyot. So I'm hoping that at the end of this, you won't be quite so het up about it. So the first thing I'd like to do is I would like to dedicate this shiur to all the people who in the last 12 months have suffered from our dreadful COVID pandemic, those that we've lost, those that have been ill. Jeffrey Glasky told me in shul this morning that it's a year tomorrow since his cousin Robert Pereira passed away. Some of you will have known him, a fine person, and it's a year ago tomorrow since he passed away from COVID. There have been sadly numerous people who've been ill and have passed away, and I'd like to dedicate this shiur to their memory. Now, I know that some of you, well, let's put it this way. I know what some of you were doing on the 11th of March, 2018. Now, how do I know that? Because last night I listened to a shiur that I gave on the 11th of March, 2018, and I heard all your questions that you asked at that time. Stephen's smiling. You were asking me questions, Stephen, in that shiur. Now, those of you who have perfect memories and were at the shiur on the 11th of March 2018, I suggest that you go and make yourself a cup of coffee and do something more useful. Because if you have a perfect memory of what I said 3 years ago on the 11th of March 2018, you are probably not going to learn anything new. I went downstairs after I'd listened to the shiur last night, and I said to Elisheva, I said, I've just listened to a fantastic shiur on Kitniyot. And she said, oh yeah, who by? I said, me. So I thought it was rather good. Now, I hope that you're going to think it's rather good, because I'm going to do exactly the same thing, except this time it's not just audio. This time we have video as well, which is rather good because we can share the screen and I can show you various things on the screen. It's what happened last time was that this shiur took me 1 hour and 26 minutes to get through. Now, one of the things that I noticed when I was listening to it last night was that lots of people were asking questions as we went along, like we normally do in our shiurim. And I kept saying, hang on, I'm coming to that later. I'm coming to that later. And so I think for this shiur, although it's not usually the style that we do, I'm going to ask you, if you have questions, just to either remember them or jot them down on a piece of paper as we're going along. And then when I'm finished, if you still have the questions, then we can try and answer them. But judging by last time, most of the things that you will think of as questions as we go along will, I hope, get answered as we go along and as we get into the topic. So if that's okay with you, I'm going to keep you muted and ask you for consideration, and just keep your questions until the end. And then I will stay on as long as is required to try and answer as many questions as possible. Okay, so what was really interesting as well to me is I knew I'd done this shiur, but I didn't remember the details of exactly how I'd done it and what have you. So when I put in the word Kitniyot into my computer and searched, what actually came up was really quite amazing. It came up as Kitniyot, what it is and what it isn't, which is exactly what I had called this shiur, not having remembered what it was from 3 years ago, which shows actually that at least, if nothing else, I'm consistent. So Kitniyot, what it is and what it isn't. and also what is Kitniyot and what isn't Kitniyot. Now, those two statements are not quite the same if you think about it. So, Kitniyot, let's have a little look at Kitniyot. I have sent, or Avril has sent out two pieces of information. One is a short guide, which is really the summary of where we're going to get to in an hour and a bit. And the other is a 5-page Hebrew source sheet for those who are more academically inclined to have a look at the sources. What I'm going to send out, or what Avril is going to send out afterwards, is a more detailed guide, but I'm not going to send it. I didn't send it you ahead of time because I want to go through it as we go through the shiur, and then at the end I will send it out so that you have, as it were, a comprehensive summary of what we're going to say. Now, this shiur comes with a health warning. The health warning is that those people who are entrenched in their own minhagim may find what I have to say distressing. So there's your caveat to start with. Now, and that's what last time we did the shiur, one of our chevra kept saying, well, what about the spirit of Pesach? What about the spirit of Pesach? What about the spirit of Pesach? And I kept having to say to him, it's coming, it's coming, it's coming. And at the end, we discussed it. So what we're going to talk about here is the halachot of Pesach with regard to Kitniyot, and the minhagim of Kitniyot. And we're going to try and make a distinction between what is halacha and what is minhag. Now, you can think about the interaction between the two things in this particular way. If you think of the halacha as the basic food in a dish that you are cooking, so let's say you're cooking potatoes. Your halacha is the potatoes. Now, if you just have boiled potatoes, it's a little bland, it's a little dry, it's a little unexciting. So what you do is you put something on it. You may put salt and pepper, or you may put a sauce on it, or you may do something to the basic food to make it a little bit more exciting. And that's the minhag aspect of Judaism. So if you just have that dry halacha, it's like eating boiled potatoes. But if you just have the minhag, it's like eating salt and pepper without the potatoes. That's also not very a sensible thing to do. So in order to have a tasty dish, a tasty, inspiring Judaism, we need both halacha and we need minhag. Now, there is nothing more evocative of minhag than Pesach. If I were to ask you all to think of something which reminds you of the Pesach of your youth, I think that most of you would think of something which was actually not halacha. You would think of something which was minhag. We tried this experiment last time. We were in person last time. It was before anybody had ever heard of Zoom, and there were about 20 odd people in the room, and I asked them all to tell me one thing that they could remember about Pesach. And some people said Ein Gimachs, some people said Knei Delach, some people said having a shlof erev Pesach, so that they were up for the Seder. All these things of their youth, of their childhood that they remembered were all things that were very specific to their family and their particular minhag. And minhag is very, very important. But it's also important not to confuse minhag with halacha. Now, I'm sure I'm not the only person who knows folk like this, but I know folk who are not particularly observant in their Judaism. They may not be Shomer Shabbat. They may not even eat kosher food when they go out of their home. But God forbid they should eat rice on Pesach. They'd rather die than do that. And there's a huge disconnect in some way between the people's keeping of minhag on Pesach and halacha on Pesach and the rest of the year. So one of the things I want to do in this shiur is to make it absolutely clear what is halacha, what is minhag, and how strong each part of the minhag is. And I hope at the end of it you'll have an understanding of the hierarchy of the situation with Kitniyot. Now, what I am going to tell you today is based on the modern Orthodox Dati Leumi approach taken in Eretz Israel today. It is based on the opinions of a man called Rabbi Dov Lior. I'm going to share his Wikipedia page with you now, so that you can see that. Can you see that Wikipedia page? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So there's Rabbi Dov Lior. You can see what he looks like. He's got a black hat on, so that makes him from. He was born to a Belzer Hasidic family. He was on the SS Exodus in 1947. He changed his name to the Hebrew Lior when he first came. He studied in Bnei Akiva Kfar HaRoeh, and he is the religious Zionist leader, a student of Rabbi Tzvi Yehuda Kook, and he was the rabbi of Moshav Kfar HaRoeh, which is just north of Netanya, for those of you who are around our area. A later rabbi of Kfar HaRoeh will be familiar to many of those from Manchester, Rav Simcha Eliezer Wise, who used to be the rabbi in Whitefield and then was in the rabbi in Shrubberies, and then he went to be the rabbi in Kfar HaRoeh. But before him was Rabbi Dov Lior. He is the Rosh Yeshiva of, he was a chief rabbi of Hebron and Rosh Yeshiva of the Hesder Yeshiva in Kiryat Arba near Hebron, and he is a very knowledgeable and very powerful gentleman with a very clear understanding and very clear mind. The psakim of the modern Orthodox world regarding Kitniyot are largely based on his opinions. So that's where we're coming from. In our particular community, our rabbi, Ravido Pechter, is a chassid, as it were, of Rabbi Lior. In other words, he takes on his opinions as well. So what I'm going to be telling you here is based on Rabbi Lior's psak. It is consistent with our Rav, Ravido, and it is there and open for your sort of consideration and how it fits in with the minhag of your family, which we will see as we go along is important. So let's get straight in and have a look at the idea of Kitniyot on Pesach. Let me share you this screen now. Okay, you should be able to see the Tchelet logo and handout and guide for Kitniyot Pesach 5781. Yeah, can you see that? Okay, so chametz is something which we are not allowed on Pesach. Everybody knows that. We are not allowed to eat or to own chametz. So what, somebody is scribbling on my sheet. I don't know how that has happened, but somebody is scribbling on my sheet there. That's clever. Anyway, what is chametz? Chametz has to have 3 elements in it. Firstly, the Gemara in Psachim 35a, if you want to see it, it's the first source on the Hebrew source sheet that Avril sent out. The Mishnah in Psachim tells us very clearly that there are 5 species of grain, which are translated into English: wheat, barley, oats, spelt, and rye. Those are the 5 grains. Now, chametz is and can only be made from those 5 things. So if it doesn't have wheat, barley, oats, spelt, or rye in it, it cannot be chametz. Okay. Now, Can anybody see? This is a rhetorical question, so you don't need to answer it. But can anybody see rice, chickpeas, peas, beans, canola oil, or corn, or any of those other things in that list there? The answer is no, and therefore none of those things can become chametz. The only thing that can become chametz is something that has wheat, barley, oats, spelt, or rye in it. Okay, that is a first principle. You cannot have chametz if you don't have those things. Now, what else do you need to make something chametz? Is wheat, barley, oats, spelt, and rye on their own chametz? No, of course not, because we have matzah, don't we? And most of us eat matzah made from wheat. So therefore, there must be some other ingredient that makes these things chametz. By the way, just as an aside, those people who are gluten sensitive and cannot eat wheat can fulfill their mitzvah of matzah using any of the other 4 grains. Commercially, there are oat matzot available. They're very expensive because not many people buy them, so they have to be specially made. But those people who are gluten sensitive, and according to the most recent research, gluten sensitivity is on the increase. Those of you who are gluten sensitive, you can buy oat matzah. Now, just as another aside, why is it that we have to, what can we fulfill our mitzvah of matzah with? We can only fulfill our mitzvah of matzah on the first night of Pesach with something that is capable of becoming chametz. So we can only eat matzah made of those 5 things. You cannot fulfill your mitzvah of matzah if you make your matzah with corn flour, for example, because it's not one of the 5 grains. Only something that can become chametz can be used to make matzah for the mitzvah of Leil HaSeder. So in order to have chametz, you have only 5 things, basic ingredients that there must be. But as we said, you have to have something else. So what else do you have to have? You have to have one of the 5 grains plus water, okay? So if you have dry flour, you have dry wheat flour, barley flour, oats, spelt, or rye, and it's completely dry, can you have that on Pesach? Answer, yes, because you have not got chametz. Chametz has got to be one of the 5 grains which comes into contact with water, and it has to be in contact with water for 18 minutes before it's completely baked. So how do we make matzah? We mix flour of one of those 5 grains, let's call it wheat because most of it is wheat. We mix wheat flour with water, and we do all the things you're meant to do, knead it and all that stuff, put the holes in it, and then you bake it, and it has to be completely baked within 18 minutes. If it goes over 18 minutes, it is chametz. If it does not go over 18 minutes and it is fully baked within 18 minutes, it has flour, water, and it is not chametz. So in order to have chametz, you have to have one of the 5 grains. It has to be mixed with water. Now, what does water mean? You might think, well, that's obvious what water means. Well, before the shiur began, the little chit chat before was talking about matzah ashira, which is matzah, which is chametz. What am I talking about? Which is flour, which is mixed with something, another liquid, which is not water. It can be either grape juice or fruit juice or egg. And it is technically not chametz, which is why some people will eat it on Pesach and some people won't. So we're not going to get into matzah ashira now. Those of you, by the way, those of you who want to know a little bit about matzah ashira, want to know whether you can use it on Erev Pesach, if you go onto the Techela website or Facebook, you will see a link to a shiur that Rav Ido Pechter gave last week exactly on that topic. So I'm not going to get that into that today. Avril can send you out the link to that afterwards as well. for matzah ashira. But chametz has to be what it says at the bottom of that page. One of the 5 grains plus water plus 18 minutes. And we're going to call that, for the purposes of this shiur, category 1. Category 1 is chametz. Okay? Everybody agrees you cannot eat or own that on Pesach, and that is not a minhag, that is halacha. Okay? Halacha. Red line, cannot have it. Chametz, asur, forbidden on Pesach. But in order for it to be forbidden, it has to have one of the 5 grains plus water and not be baked within 18 minutes. Okay, that is chametz. We all understand that. Now, let's go on. What about rice? I'm going to go up the thing slowly so that you can see it. At the bottom of the page, rice. I'm going to call that category 2. Now, rice is in a separate category to all the other kitniyot. Now, the reason for that is that there was a machloket, there was a disagreement amongst the rabbis of the Mishnah going back 1800 years. In the rabbis of the Mishnah, there was a disagreement as to whether there were 5 grains or 6 grains. There was a dat yachid, there was an individual opinion, a gentleman by the name of Rav Yochanan ben Nuri. If you want to see it, it's in sources 1 and 2 in the Hebrew sheet. I'm not going to go through them because I want to get through all the material, but I've sent out the sheets for those who want to actually look at in the original. Rav Yochanan ben Nuri, he was of the opinion that there weren't 5 grains, there were 6 grains. And according to him, rice flour plus water plus 18 minutes was chametz proper. He would have rice in his category 1. Nobody else in the Mishnah agreed with him, and we do not paskin like that. Rice and water and 18 minutes is not chametz. But because there was an individual opinion that said there was this could be chametz, all the Ashkenazim and the Moroccan Sephardim took on not to eat rice on Pesach. Okay, is it halacha? No, because if it was halacha, then the other Sephardim who do eat rice wouldn't be able to do it. It's not a halacha that you can't eat rice. It is a very, very strong minhag, and it goes back 1800 years to the time of the Mishnah. It's the oldest non-halacha, if you like, around Pesach, because rice is mentioned in the Mishnah. Rav Yochanan ben Nuri says you can't eat rice on Pesach. We do not paskin like him, but because of the things with Pesach, because of the strictness of Pesach, people are taking it on, and Ashkenazim and Moroccan Sephardim do not eat rice on Pesach. So I'm called that category 2. Right, now then, let's get into Kitniyot. The first and earliest mention of Kitniyot was in the 13th century in Provence, in France. So if you are confused and upset about this whole inyan of Kitniyot, you can blame the French, because it all started in Provence. The earliest mention is in Northern Europe, in France, and this was something which only the Ashkenazim took on. The Sephardim of Southern Europe, so Spain and Portugal, and the Sephardim of North Africa never got involved in this whole Kitniyot business. So forget category 1 and 2 for the moment. Category 1, everybody goes with, it's a halacha. Category 2 was taken on by all Ashkenazim and Moroccans. Category 3, which you'll see in a moment, is going to be what I call proper Kitniyot, was taken on only by Ashkenazim. Ashkenazim meaning the people, the Jews of Northern Europe and Eastern Europe, so Northern and Eastern Europe, not by the Sephardim of Southern Europe and not by the Sephardim of North Africa. Okay, so let's have a look at what the reasons were for Kitniyot. Why did the rabbis in Provence say we shouldn't eat Kitniyot? Let's just leave what Kitniyot are specifically for the second, because you can't really translate Kitniyot. I'm going to translate Kitniyot as Kitniyot, and you'll see why in a minute. What were the reasons that we cannot eat Kitniyot, or the rabbis in 13th century France decided that we should not eat Kitniyot? There were basically two reasons for this. The main reason was something called ta'aruvot, which is translated as mixtures. There was a concern that chametz would get mixed up with Kitniyot. In other words, the flours. What is flour? Flour, we think of flour as wheat flour, but flour is anything that's ground up into a fine powder. So you can grind up chickpeas, you can grind up peas, you can grind up beans, you can grind up all sorts of things. You can grind up soya beans, you can grind up all sorts of things and make them into a flour. Now, back in the day, in 13th century Provence, they didn't come in little plastic things with a nice little clip top, or they didn't come in nice bags which were sealed. What you did was you went to the flour shop and you saw in the front of the flour shop enormous sacks of flour, and one of them would have a label on saying wheat flour. The next door one would have a label saying chickpea flour. The next one would have a label saying pea flour or whatever. And they were one next door to the other. And there would probably be a scoop. So you could scoop out of the big sack into your own container. You would then weigh that container and you would pay for the flour that you had bought. Now, there was probably only one scoop for all the different bags. And so what would happen is you would get a ta'aruvot, you'd get a mixture, because somebody would come along and use the scoop for wheat flour. And then the next person would come along, take the scoop out of the wheat flour sack, stick it into the chickpea flour sack and get a kilo of chickpea flour. And together with this kilo of chickpea flour would have a little bit of wheat flour in with it. And it would all be mixed up. That's number one mixture. Number two mixture was that these sacks were expensive. They weren't disposable. They would be made of some expensive material. And once they were empty, they would be reused. And a wheat flour bag was not necessarily reused for a wheat flour the next time. It could be reused for chickpea flour. Now, of course, you can never empty a bag completely. There's going to be some residue of stuff left in. So when you are taking out your chickpea flour or your pea flour or your bean flour, you may well have little bits of wheat flour in there. Or you may have bits of barley flour or spelt or rye or, what's the one I've missed out? Oats. So any of those 5 grains, you may have bits of them in something that you don't think has got that in. And so therefore, the rabbis were worried that we would have some possibility of chametz. Now, you're going to say to me, well, it's only a tiny bit. Who cares? Well, we all care, actually, because there are halachot, as you know, of things being what's called bitul, of being subsumed and being cancelled, if you like. For example, if you have in your fridge this morning, you have some leftover cholent from yesterday, and in your fridge door, you have a bottle of milk. And if, when you close the fridge door, a few drops of that milk goes into the cholent from yesterday, then you're going to ask me, well, can I still eat it? This is a mixture of meat and milk. Many of you be familiar with the concept of batel b'shishim, being cancelled on a ratio of 1 to 60. So the halacha is, if there is less than 1/60th of milk falls into the meat, then you can still eat the meat. Now, it doesn't mean you can put it in lechatchila. You can't go and put a little bit of milk in your meat and say, oh, it's only less than the 60th. This is only b'diavad. If it happened that a bit of milk dropped into your meat, 1/60th. Now, what about treifus? What about treif things? You've got some kosher meat in your fridge, and for some reason or other, you've got some treifa meat there as well. I don't know why you would have it, no, but you have. And the treifa meat falls into the kosher meat. What's the halacha? Is it batel b'shishim? Is it cancelled out with 1/60th? The answer is no. We go by what's called rov, the majority. So as long as 51% of that mixture is the kosher meat, you could still eat that meat. You probably wouldn't today, because not many of us are so desperately hungry that we would have to eat something that we knew had 49% of treifus in it. But b'diavad, it would be okay to eat, because the halacha with non-kosher meat is the majority. So again, that's only after the event. You can't go and make a dish made out of 49% non-kosher meat and say, oh, well, it's only 49%, I can eat it. That's only if it happens b'diavad, by mistake, after the event. Now, why am I telling you that? Because the halacha with chametz is completely different. It's much stricter. 1 grain of chametz, 1 tiny bit, what's called in Hebrew a mashahu, almost a nothing, which in treifus, in basar v'chalav, in meat and milk, would be considered completely batel, completely subsumed, completely not there. When it comes to chametz, it counts. And therefore, a grain of flour, a few puffs of flour of wheat that gets into your chickpea flour, and then you take it home and you mix your chickpea flour with water, and then you leave it for 18 minutes, you could possibly have chametz. Now, because of that chashash, because of that worry, the rabbis in 13th century Provence said, we had better forbid all those things that look like flour of the 5 grains, and that could have come into contact with the flour of those 5 grains, and therefore there could be a mixture of those things. So when I get my chickpea flour, I may have some wheat flour or barley flour in it. So they said, okay, we're not going to have that on Pesach, to be absolutely sure that we don't even have a mashahu, a tiny bit of possible chametz. And as I said, the Sephardim did not take that on board right from the beginning. They never took it on board, and so it never came into the equation. We're only talking about Ashkenazim from Northern Europe. Okay, that's the first and main reason for the minhag, the strong minhag, of not eating kitniyot on Pesach. The second one is at the bottom of the page there, called kedeira. Kedeira is a dish which is spoken about in the Talmud, and it is a sort of porridge. It's a sort of mush of some kind of grain with water or milk or some other kind of fluid. It's probably the equivalent of what we would today have called porridge, which most of us Brits would use oats for our porridge in the mornings. And this was a dish that was made from those grains. Now, you could also make kedera. You could also make this porridge from chickpeas, beans, peas, all those other things that you would grind up that the rabbis said were problematic. All of those things could be mixed with your water or your milk and could be obviously not baked within 18 minutes, and therefore that could look like chametz. So I walk in on a Pesach morning, and I walk into Philip Lehra's house, and I see Philip Lehra tucking in to this kedera, right? Now, he's a very knowledgeable person, and he knows that his flour that he's got there, that he's made his kedera with, is made out of peas and beans, and there is no wheat in it at all. How does he know that? Because he's grown the thing himself, and he's taken the peas out of his own garden, he's ground them up, he's made his kedera, he's sitting there having his stuff. It's completely permitted. And I walk in and I say to myself, well, Philip Lehra's a frum fellow. He knows what he's doing. And look, he's eating this kedera. It must be okay to eat this porridge. So I'm going to go home and I'm going to get my 5 grains, because I don't know that he's made it out of peas and beans and something else which isn't chametz. So, and that is called maret ayin. I'm going to see him do something which may not be incorrect, but I might be led astray because I think he knows what he's doing, and I misinterpret what he's doing. So because kedera could be made from all these other ground up stuff, then the rabbi said anything that you can make this ground up stuff from, then we are not going to allow it on Pesach, because somebody might come to make a mistake and then use the 5 grains and then eat proper chametz, which is no good. So those were the 2 reasons that the rabbis in Provence. It is a fence around the Torah. It's what we talked about in the Shabbat and Refuah Shiur last week. It is the yellow line on the train platform to prevent you falling off. It is the rope around the artifact in the museum to prevent you from actually ruining the artifact. It's a fence around the Torah. And it became a very strong fence because it's a very old minhag. You can see it goes back to the 13th century. Now, what did the original decree, the original gezerah say? What was in the list, what was on the list of all the things that the rabbis in Provence said that you should not have on Pesach? And there it is on the screen for you. Rice, peas, lentils, beans, chickpeas, seeds of any kind, and sesame. Okay, and anything else that could be ground up. So those are the things which we Ashkenazim do not eat on Pesach because of the minhag of Provence from the 13th century. And I have called that, for want of a better term, proper kitniyot. Okay, it's different to rice. Rice is in a category of its own because it's in category 2 because of Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. This is category 3, proper kitniyot. So these things, Ashkenazim, by and large, will not eat on Pesach because these are part of the original decree. Now, that's fairly non-controversial so far. There's not many people who would disagree with that idea, but you need to understand that this is not halakha. This is minhag, but it's a very, very strong minhag. There is a point which comes where minhag sort of blurs into halakha, and this is what's happened with proper kitniyot. As I said to you earlier on, there are people who are not really very observant, but they absolutely would not eat rice, peas, lentils, beans, chickpeas, seeds, or sesame on Pesach, because that's, if you'll pardon the pun, it's become ingrained into them. So this is a decree that goes back to the 13th century and has been kept religiously, and I use that word advisedly, it's been kept religiously by Ashkenazim throughout the centuries. And in my opinion, and in Rav Lior's opinion, which is more important, these things, proper kitniyot, should not be eaten by Ashkenazim in the 21st century or any time, because there is a value to minhag. There is a value to what the rabbis told us to do. And if we take away that, it's like taking away your salt and pepper from your boiled potatoes. We need to have the minhag, which has gone on for so long. So again, so far, not very controversial. Now comes the bit which should have the health warning on it. Anybody in Chutz La'aretz who's watching this, or who's going to watch it in Chutz La'aretz on the recording, will probably not recognize the next bit, because this is where the modern Orthodox Israeli approach diverges a little bit from certainly what I was taught, and I suspect what most of you were taught. So let's go on. So this is what I call New World Kitniyot, and I've called this category 4, and these are things which should be Kitniyot, but aren't. Now, what do I mean by that? Okay, can you grind up maize, corn, soya, quinoa, I think that's how you say it, and potato? Can you grind those up and make them into flour? It's a rhetorical question. The answer is yes, you can do all of those things. Now, what is the difference then between those things and those things? The proper original kitniyot. The clue, ladies and gentlemen, is in the title I've given it, New World Kitniyot. These things were not known in the 13th century in Northern Europe. Okay, these things were not known. Maize, corn, soya, quinoa, and potato did not exist in Northern Europe in the 13th century. Potatoes, for example, did not come to Northern Europe until the 16th century. You'll all remember that from school. What was his name? Sir Walter Raleigh. He was the one, wasn't he, that brought potatoes to England in the 16th century. So in the 13th century in Provence, they did not have potatoes. They also did not have soya, quinoa, corn, or maize. So they were not put in the Gezerah. They were not put in the decree because they didn't exist. So the problem is that some people say this bit here, anything that can be ground up, includes anything in the future that could be ground up. So there is an opinion that says anything that looks like kitniyot, proper kitniyot, anything that fulfills the category of proper kitniyot, in other words, it can be ground up into a flour and could get mixed up with other flours, or could be mistaken in a porridge-like substance as being part of the 5 grains. Those things must be added on to the list of things we can't have. And that is the position that most of you lot, including myself, would have been taught, because that is the position that has been taken by most of the poskim in Chutz La'aretz, with one very, very, very notable exception, which I will come to shortly. Now, there is an inconsistency here, is there not? Because If we're going to say that, and it's a valid argument, that we're going to add on to the Kitniyot problem, we're going to add on to the Kitniyot list all the things that look like the original Kitniyot, even though they didn't exist, then we've got this thing here at the bottom, haven't we? Potato. Now, all of you ladies and gentlemen who are involved in cooking and baking for Pesach will know, or even those who are not involved in the cooking and baking but are involved in the shopping for Pesach, will know that a staple ingredient of many of Pesach recipes is potato flour. I remember going to the shops and bringing back bagfuls of the stuff, dozens of the bagfuls of the stuff, because everything that you bake in on Pesach has got potato flour in it. It's got to have some kind of basis to it, and potato flour, certainly where I come from, potato flour was the main ingredient on Pesach. Now, if that's the case, we've got a problem, haven't we? Because if you're going to say anything that can be ground up must be added on to the Kitniyot list, then why is potato allowed? And there is nobody who does not allow potatoes on Pesach. And there is nobody in the Ashkenaz world, leave aside your gebroch's business, there is nobody in the Ashkenaz world who doesn't use potato flour on Pesach because of Kitniyot. So why was potatoes not forbidden on Pesach? Quite simply because potato was a staple diet. In Eastern Europe, and also probably to a lesser degree, but also in Northern Europe, potatoes were the main thing that people ate. That was their main carbohydrate, apart from wheat. And if you take out the wheat and the barley and the oats and the spelt and the rye, you'll have nothing to eat if you don't have potatoes. And the rabbis never made a decree that the community could not keep to. If it was too hard, they didn't make it. So potato, when the rabbis extended the original Gezerah, potato was not included because it was a staple diet and it was too difficult. Now, there is a massive inconsistency there, because today potato is not a staple. We could quite easily live without potatoes on Pesach, same as we can live without rice and without chickpeas and without peas and without beans. So there's an inconsistency there. So I'm going to call category 4 New World Kitniyot, the things that did not exist at the time of the original decree, but which some rabbis have added on to the list. And you'll see that it makes a big difference. That's category 4. Now, I mentioned to you that there are 2 approaches. Approach number 2, I've already told you about. Add in everything which they would have included had it been in existence, except for staples. So I don't mean staples that you staple things together with. I mean staple diets, obviously. So the approach number 2 is what we've just spoken about. Add in everything that you can think of that could possibly have been included in the original decree had it been in existence in those times. So maize, yes. Corn, yes. Soya, yes. Quinoa, yes. Potatoes, no, because it's a staple. Now, I told you there was one very, very notable exception to that opinion. And that exception is a gentleman who many of you will have heard, Reb Moshe Feinstein, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, probably the foremost posek of the late 20th century, certainly in North America, a man who everybody accepts as a great halachist, somebody who was the posek hador, the person who everybody went to for his psak. He has a fascinating psak on this, and what he says is regard to peanuts. I didn't put peanuts on that list deliberately. Now, if you were to ask me, did I eat peanuts when I was a kid on Pesach? The answer was absolutely not. Peanuts were verboten. They were not allowed. They were part of Kitniyot. We did not eat peanuts. I remember at Pesach, one of my memories of Pesach is that we used to get little metal tins with a ring pull. It was the first time I'd ever seen a ring pull. And inside these little tins were hazelnuts. And it was a big treat because we never had hazelnuts during the year. We only had hazelnuts at Pesach. Why not? Because during the year we had peanuts, because my father loved peanuts. But he couldn't eat peanuts at Pesach because peanuts weren't allowed. Why weren't peanuts allowed? Because they were Kitniyot. But were they Kitniyot? No. Were they on the original decree? Are they proper Kitniyot? No. Why not? Because they didn't exist. Peanuts did not exist in Northern Europe in the 13th century. So they ought to be in category 4, things which should be Kitniyot, but aren't because they didn't exist. Now, Rav Moshe Feinstein was asked, is it permitted to eat peanuts on Pesach? And his answer, you'll find it in the source sheet there. I can't remember it without looking exactly which source it is, but I'll look later and I'll tell you. That Rav Moshe Feinstein clearly says that peanuts can be eaten on Pesach because they did not exist. They were not part of the original decree. Now, by saying that, Rav Moshe Feinstein clearly tells us that we do not need to take approach number 2, which is to add in everything which would have been included had it been in existence. Because if he agreed with that, he would have said you can't eat peanuts. And Rav Moshe Feinstein said you can eat peanuts. And what he demonstrates by that is that he, Rav Moshe Feinstein, did not take on the idea that all these things that didn't exist at the time of the original decree should be added on. Rav Moshe Feinstein does make a caveat to his psak. He says, however, if it is your minhag not to eat peanuts, then you shouldn't eat them. And that I want you just to park for the moment because we're going to come back to that at the end. So Rav Moshe Feinstein clearly tells us that approach number 2, which is to add in everything else that didn't exist at the time, is not something that he holds of. He allows you to eat peanuts, and therefore he would also allow you to eat these things on Pesach because they're not the 5 grains, they're not chametz, and they're not category 1, they're not rice, so they're not category 2, and they're not proper Kitniyot, they're not category 3, they're category 4. They are New World Kitniyot, which Rav Moshe Feinstein does not hold by. Okay, that's very important. Now, let's move on. I hope you're writing down your questions because I'm sure you've got them, but I want to get through as much as possible before we go on to questions. What about oils? Oils are category 5. Now, how do you make oil? You make oil by crushing various things like seeds or olives or whatever it is you're getting your oil from. So you get your thing. Let's take soya beans, for example. Soya beans can either be ground up to make soya flour, or they can be pounded, they can be smashed up, and you can get oil out of them. And so you get your oil out of your soya. Now, let's say you are somebody who takes on number 2. You take on here that you believe that everything that would have been included in the original decree should be added on, including soya. So you're going to say, I'm not eating soya beans, I'm not eating soya products because of that. Fine. But what about oil? You've got your soya, and in the process, you have smashed it up and you've extracted the oil, you've filtered out all the sediment, all the bits of solid soya, and you're left with the oil of the soya. The one thing that cannot come into contact with that product and still be a proper oil is what? Water. Oil and water do not mix. So if you have pure soya oil, you can be guaranteed that there is no water in that oil. Because if there was, you would see it, because oil and water separate. They don't mix. So by definition, oils cannot be chametz. If they cannot be chametz, then they don't fall into the category of things that the gezerah was originally meant for, because the gezerah, the decree, was originally meant to prevent us from inadvertently eating chametz. Now, the use of oil made from a kitniyot product cannot be coming to contact with water for 18 minutes, because if it did, you just separate it out. It just doesn't mix. You can't mix oil and water. That is a scientific fact. So if you're going to say that the original decree of kitniyot, for all those proper kitniyot, category 3, these things over here, if you're going to say, like we said, that this is a fence around the Torah, and then you're going to say that category 4 is another fence around the fence, because we want to make sure that we don't eat proper kitniyot, so we're going to add on extra stuff that might look like kitniyot. So that's a fence around a fence. Now you've got a fence around a fence around a fence, because oil cannot become chametz. So your yellow line is now not a meter away from the platform's edge, or even 2 or 3 meters from the platform's edge. It's half a mile away, because you cannot get to chametz by using a kitniyot oil. So therefore, oils of kitniyot products, or New World kitniyot products at the very, very least, are permitted lechatchila for Ashkenazim according to this approach. Now, that means that well, you do not need to use things like palm oil, for example. When I was a kid, I remember going shopping with my mum, and it was all walnut oil was the only oil that was in the shops at that time for Pesach. There was palm oil is in the shops here. Do not use palm oil, whatever your opinion is on the halacha. It is extremely unhealthy. Palm oil is poison. Don't use it. You can use sunflower oil. Why? What about sunflowers? Are sunflowers part of the original gezerah? Do you see sunflowers in here? No, but it is a seed. It is a seed. So is sunflower proper kitniyot or not? Well, I did a little bit of research. Do you know how old sunflowers are? Sunflowers are very, very old. They were known in the East, in China, 4,000 years ago. However, they did not come to Northern Europe until the 17th century, 400 years after the Gezerah. So those of you who hold, like Reb Moshe Feinstein, would say that sunflower is permitted, and certainly sunflower oil, because oils cannot become chametz. Sunflower is at the best in category 4, and Reb Moshe Feinstein you can rely on, and you can certainly say the oils of sunflower, and that goes for canola oil, what's it called, canola oil, which is, I think, is made from rapeseed, which also didn't exist at the time of the Gezerah. All those oils that say le'ochlei kitniyot bilvad, that only for kitniyot eaters, is permitted according to this opinion. So all those oils are not kitniyot. and can be used with impunity by Ashkenazim who are following this approach. Okay, that's category 5. We're making good progress here. Now, this one is an interesting one. Category 6, mixtures of Kitniyot before Pesach are bitul barov. Now, if you take a product and within that product there is a small amount of Kitniyot and it is made before Pesach, that Kitniyot, according to Rav Lior's opinion, that Kitniyot is batel. It is in the same way as your milk in your meat, less than 1/60th doesn't count. The Kitniyot doesn't count in the product if it is less than the majority. This, of course, does not apply to chametz. Chametz, even a tiny grain, is no good. Here we're talking about Kitniyot, a mixture of Kitniyot which is put in there before Pesach and which is less than the majority can be eaten according to this approach. Now, that means, for example, yogurts. Yogurts, you'll see, most of the yogurts you'll see in the supermarkets here in Israel have on it le'ochle kitniyot bilvad, only for those who eat kitniyot. Now, the labeling here in Israel is a little bit confusing. It's not their fault. You can't expect them to put an hour and a half shiur on every label to explain to you what kitniyot is and what kitniyot isn't. So it's just easier. You know what? If you don't eat kitniyot, go somewhere else. Eat somewhere else. Don't. It's too complicated. I can't. So that's all they can do. If you have, you will see. By the way, we'll come to that in category 7 in a minute. So if it says le'ochle kitniyot bilvad, it doesn't necessarily mean that you can't eat it, because you'll see that says le'ochle kitniyot bilvad, only for kitniyot eaters, on sunflower oil. And I've just explained to you that that's perfectly okay according to this approach. The yogurts that have been made before Pesach, which have a small amount of kitniyot, by the way, the small amount of kitniyot that it will have in it will be soya, probably, and soya is in category 4 at best. So even that's allowed, according to Reb Moshe Feinstein. So again, we're talking fences around fences around fences around fences here. So that's category 6. Now, the final category is category 7. And that is a product called Liftit. I don't know what it's called in English, actually. I tried to find out the translation of it. But anyway, it is a product of a Kitniyot oil. Okay, I'm not exactly sure what it's made from, but it's a product of oil, and you'll find it in chocolate. It's used to make chocolate. And you will see, if you look at the elite bars of chocolate, which many of you will be familiar with if you live in Israel, and some of you will be familiar with it in Chutz La'aretz because they export a lot as well. Elite chocolate bars for Pesach have 2 hechsherim on it. They have a hechsher from the chief rabbinate of Ramat Gan, where their main factory is, which says kasher lePesach leochlei kitniyot bilvad, and there is another hechsher which is a badatz Eda Charedit, the Bet Din Tzedek of the Haredi community in Jerusalem, which says kasher lelo Pesach, not kosher for Pesach. So we used to have a joke in the UK that the Manchester Bet Din was much more strict than the London Bet Din about kashrut, and there used to be a joke asking the question, at which point down the M1 did the Mars bar become kosher or not kosher? Here you've got 2 hechsherim on the same product. One says it's kosher, one says it's not. And the reason for that is that the Charedim, the Eda Charedit, do not hold of any of the stuff that we've just been talking about. Now, Liftit is category 7, and this is permitted to everybody for a number of reasons. One, it's a product of oil. We've already spoken about oil. Oil is in category 5. It cannot become chametz. And most importantly, on its own, Liftit is inedible. You cannot take a spoonful of Liftit and eat it. it's inedible. Well, you may ask me the question, well, maybe you shouldn't be eating the chocolate then. It's probably not good for you. That's a different question. It probably isn't. But liftit is not edible. If it's not edible, that's another reason why it can't become chametz. Only something that is edible can become chametz. So a dog would not eat liftit. And so liftit is not ever going to become into the category of chametz. So that's right at the bottom, category 7, liftit. So we've got all of those things. That's the end of the guide there. And here's a summary. Here's a summary on the screen. Category 1, chametz, forbidden to everybody on Pesach, halacha. Category 2, which is rice, forbidden to all Ashkenazim and Moroccans. And this is the minhag which has almost the status of a halacha. And it's based on Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri from the Mishnah from 1800 years ago. Category 3 is what I called proper kitniyot, the original gezerah, the original decree from the rabbis of Provence in the 13th century, which included chickpeas, peas, beans, lentils, those kind of things. Forbidden to all Ashkenazim. That's a very, very strong minhag. Category 4, this is where it starts to get a little bit optional, if you like. 2 different approaches. Either you take the approach that says, as Reb Feinstein said, that the gezerah was the gezerah, and something that did not exist in that time was not included, and you do not add it in. So for him, he was talking about peanuts in that particular example. You can eat peanuts, so you don't add in things that didn't exist. So corn didn't exist, maize didn't exist, soya didn't exist, quinoa didn't exist, rapeseed didn't exist, canola didn't exist. All those things didn't exist. If you take the approach of Rav Moshe Feinstein, none of those things are kitniyot because they were not in the original decree. However, there is another opinion that says that anything which would have been added had it been in existence needs to be added on. Therefore, all those things I've just listed, you would not eat because of kitniyot. Now, there's an inconsistency there because potato falls into that category, and they made an exception for that because it was a staple diet, and therefore the community couldn't hold of it. Now, if you're going to say, this is my own opinion now, if you're going to say, well, I'm going to hang on to the bit that says we exclude potatoes because back in the day it was a staple. Well, hang on a minute. You're telling me you're going to add things to the original gezerah. So why not add potatoes in now? Because that also doesn't apply anymore. It's no longer a staple that you can't live without. So why not add that in? There's an inconsistency in that approach, which for me is a deal breaker. But you pays your money, you takes your choice. I'm presenting you with the 2 different approaches for category 4. Category 5, which was I think category 5 was the oils, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, category 5 is the oils. According to the modern Orthodox poskim here in Israel, this is not kitniyot and is completely permitted because it's a fence around a fence around a fence around a fence. Oil cannot mix with water. It can therefore never become chametz. And anyway, it's an oil from a category 4 kitniyot product. So there are fences around fences around fences. And according to the modern Orthodox poskim led by Rav Dov Lior, it is permitted lechatchila. Number 6 is the mixture of kitniyot, which is batel barov. It's cancelled if it's a minority and it was put in there before Pesach. It's not counted. So you can eat those things. So you can go and eat your yogurts from the supermarket. What you might not be able to do, just on category 6, is mayonnaise, because mayonnaise is not a minority of kitniyot, a bit of oil. It's mainly made from oil. But I would say to you that the mayonnaise is made from category 5, made from oils. So those mayonnaise, which says only for kitniyot bilvad, only for kitniyot eaters, are probably made from canola oil or soya oil, which falls into category 5, and according to Rav Lior's approach, would be permitted. So you do not need to go seeking out mayonnaise which is doesn't contain soya oil or canola oil, according to that approach. And category 7 is not kitniyot at all. That's the liftit. That is miles away from being kitniyot, and only the Eidah Charedit, only the Haredi community consider liftit to be in the category of kitniyot, and therefore everybody else can eat that from the start. Now, let's go back, having done that summary, and I'm going fast deliberately because I don't want to keep you too long. We're already an hour and 10 minutes already. So let's just go back to Rabbi Feinstein. Remember I said to you that he said you can eat peanuts because we don't add on to the original decree. But if it's your minhag not to eat peanuts, then you shouldn't eat them. So this therefore brings us to the difficult bit. What I've told you so far is the easy bit. It's the science, if you like. That is the facts I've given you. What I'm now going to tell you is about the spirit of Pesach. What I'm going to tell you is about the nuance of Pesach. It's that tension between the minhag of our families and the understanding of halakha and minhag. I had this conversation with Jeffrey Glasky at some length the other morning, and I promised him I'd go into it in detail now. So here's your chance now, Jeffrey. We all have our family minhagim, and what we must not do is to discard those completely. Jeffrey put forward a theory, which I don't think he fully 100% believed himself, but he put forward a theory that we are now all in Israel, we're all one people, we're all back into our own land, and we should have a unified approach to everything. And there is certainly a very strong argument for that. And I think that there is certainly a great deal to be said for that in terms of nusach, how you daven, what you eat, to appreciate other people's approaches. So, for example, in our particular shul, now and again, we will ask somebody who knows all the Sephardi tunes to daven before the Amud and to sing all the Sephardi tunes which we don't know. I'm not so sure if the Sephardim allow the Ashkenazim to go in their shuls and do that. That's another story. But we are very keen on what's called shilov, okay, a combined approach. When Ravi Doe finally, after two girls had his boy, and we did the Brit, he wrote a separate pamphlet, which was a combination of the Ashkenaz ceremony for the naming and the Sfard one. His wife, of course, is a Sfardia, so he made a shilov, a combination. So there's certainly something to be said for having a unified approach. And if we had a unified approach, we wouldn't have needed really to have spent an hour and a half going through these things, because we would understand where we were all coming from. But, and I think it's a big but, there is a danger that we will lose hundreds, and actually more than hundreds, thousands, isn't it? We go back to the 13th century, we're talking, oh no, not thousands yet, is it? We're talking, well, many hundreds, almost 1,000 years anyway, of minhag, okay, which people have felt very strongly about. Okay, now you could say to me, and I've seen it. I remember last Pesach. No, it couldn't have been last Pesach. It must have been the one before, because last Pesach we were in Sega, weren't we? We were in lockdown. 2 years ago, I remember walking through the mall here in Iriamim, and there, as you'll know, for some of you, if you're walking through to the shops, you actually have to walk through the restaurants. And there's on the second floor, there's a restaurant there called Bleeker's, which is very nice. And people are sat there at Bleeker's on Pesach, and they're eating their breakfast, and they're eating bread rolls. They are eating bread rolls. Now, I'm 100% sure that those bread rolls were not chametz. I'm 100% sure they were made out of potato flour or whatever, but they were not chametz. They may not even have been kitniyot. I don't know. Depends on what the hechsher was there. But either way, they were definitely not chametz. Now, I don't think that's right. I would not eat those things on Pesach. Technically, halachically, yes, perfectly okay. I'm not suggesting for 1 second that the hechsher at Bleeker's is not good enough. I eat there myself. However, for me, to eat something that looks like a bread roll on Pesach loses it. What is special about Sukkot is we sit in the sukkah. What's special about Shavuot? We stay up all night and we learn and we have cheesecake. What's special about Pesach is all those things from our childhood, the eingimachs, the ingber, the charoset, all the things, the fact that we don't have bread, we don't eat all those things. I remember when my kids were little, for breakfast every day they had Weetabix. That was their breakfast. On Shabbat, we allowed them to have sugary things. They had sugar puffs and Frosties as a special treat. But that's what they had. Came to Pesach, they couldn't have those things. My wife used to make these sponge cake things, and we used to give them cake and yogurt. That was their breakfast, sponge cake and yogurt. I guarantee you, to this day, if you said to any of my kids, in any context whatsoever, cake and yogurt, they would say Pesach, because that was their memory. Now, if you could make Weetabix out of potato flour, or you could make Frosties or sugar puffs that looked exactly the same and tasted exactly the same, then what you have done is you have denuded Pesach of its soul. Okay, you have made Pesach into Sukkot without the Sukkah. You've made Pesach into Shavuot without the cheesecake. You've denuded Pesach of the spirit of Pesach. So whilst I have given you today the halacha of Kitniyot, and I've done it deliberately so that you should not get obsessed by the Kitniyot issue. You don't need to go running off to the no Kitniyot only supermarket in Sands, although you can if you want. You don't need to do that. Halachically, it's perfectly okay. Now, I'm not suggesting that you abandon everything from category 4 downwards. I'm suggesting to you that it would be sensible to abandon category 7, category 6, and category 5, because I don't think you would denude any of the minhagim of Pesach by not having oils, mixtures, or liftit. However, in my own family, for example, we don't eat corn. And I'm not going to start eating corn now because that was a particular minhag in my family. We didn't eat corn. I don't need to eat corn. I know that it's in category 4, right? And I know that if I wanted to, I could eat corn, but I don't want to because I want to preserve my minhagim of Pesach. And that's what Rabbi Moshe Feinstein was getting at when he said, yes, you can eat peanuts, but if it's your minhag not to, then don't. So if you were to take somebody who was to arrive today, Erev Pesach, and convert to Judaism and say, right, I have no minhag of my parents. I have no minhag of anything. I'm brand new. He could choose whatever he wants. He could choose to be a Sephardi if he wanted and have rice and all sorts. He could choose what he wants. And it would be sensible for him to choose categories 1, 2, and possibly 3 if we wanted to be an Ashkenazi. However, for us, we've got thousands of years of, or hundreds at least, years of minhag of our family, and we must not abandon that. We don't want to make Pesach into a pale example of what we had ourselves when we were kids. So it's important that we have this balance, and it's a tension between being obsessed with nonsense, which is not part of halacha and is not even really part of minhag, and on the other hand, maintaining those things which make Pesach so special for all of us. So in conclusion, the science of it is as in this summary, this handout and guide, which will be sent out to all the group. on email and on WhatsApp for you to print out and keep. But the arty bit, the non-scientific bit, is preserve your family minhagim. You want to teach your children and your grandchildren about your Pesach and about the Pesach of your parents and your grandparents. And that is absolutely vital. And I'll just finish with a story to demonstrate that, which my children and now my grandchildren are hearing every single Pesach. And it is become part of our Pesach. My grandmother, Aleh Shalom, my mother's mother, who was a bit of a character to say the least. When my mother was born, they lived in the middle of nowhere in a place called Shrewsbury, which didn't have any Jews at all. I don't know if they were the only ones, but they were probably almost the only ones. But they kept kosher. And all the food used to be sent from Manchester on a train. And they used to have to go and pick it up from the train station. And at Pesach, the Pesach food was sent. Grandma used to tell this story every single year at Seder night. And when Grandma was no longer there, my mother used to tell us the story at Seder night. And now, sadly, she's no longer here. And I guess it'll be me that takes on telling this story at Seder night. And the story is that she would go to the train station to get the Pesach stuff. And the station master would say, Mrs. Cooper, he says, I've got some packages for you here. Very odd, he says. It says Passover cake. He says, I've heard of Madeira cake and I've heard of ginger cake, but I've never heard of Passover cake. And that was a story that was told for generations, and it will, please God, be continued to be told, that same story. Everybody knows the story, everybody's heard the story, and everybody wants to hear it again. And that is what Pesach is about. So the science is in this handout and this guide. The arty bit is all for you. It's your own. Pesach is yours. It belongs to you and your family. Don't throw away the Pesach of your family on the altar of correctness. On the other hand, don't go and be obsessed with Kitniyot where it doesn't impinge on the Pesach of your families. Okay, that is me done. 1 hour and 23 minutes. So I'm getting a bit quicker at this as we go along. I'm now open to questions. Those of you who've had enough, goodbye and Shavua Tov and Chodesh Tov till the next time. Those of you who've got questions, either raise your hand icon or wave frantically in front of your camera and I'll try and see you. Any questions? Vivian Simonoff, where are you? You had your hand up. Vivian?
Sorry, yes, yet again, superb, thank you. I'm hoping that my hubby, who's currently in a rehabilitation unit, will be listening to this after the recording. So this is specifically for him. Where he's likely to be, he's likely to still be there over Chag. And it being an Israeli government unit, I'm sure they will not be so strict on Kitniyot as we may well be at home. Would I be right in thinking, as long as he avoids the main categories of Kitniyot, so in other words, the peas, the lentils, the beans, the chickpeas, the seeds, he should just get on with it? I mean, there may be a leniency that you can apply because, of course, he's in there for ill health.
In his situation, if there was nothing else, then he should eat those things as well.
Okay.
Okay. I mean, for somebody who's poorly, remember, Kitniyot is not a halakha. It's a minhag. Yeah, if you can avoid those things, that's fine. But for somebody who's sick, if you gave him, they gave him rice and that was all there was, and you weren't there to bring him something else because it was Yom Tov, and he would go hungry and he would therefore be unwell, then absolutely he should eat the rice without a doubt. And that's category 2 as well as category 3. So yeah, that's rice as well. That's certainly the case. Let me just say something else, by the way, about peas and beans. This is very interesting, and I didn't know this until a few years ago. The halachot about peas and beans, we never ate peas and beans, and we still will not eat peas and beans. However, peas and beans that are still in their pods are called vegetables and are not part of Kitniyot. Okay, and it makes sense because you do not grind up a pea in its pod, right? It cannot be mixed up with flour because it's in its pod. So sugar snap peas, mange two, runner beans, which are still in their pods, are vegetables and are not kitniyot. So certainly we will not be having peas and we will not be having beans, but we may, if that is on the menu, have sugar snap peas or long green beans in their pods because they are vegetables and they are not kitniyot. Who this? Ella Rubin.
Hi, Johnny. Thank you for lesson. It's fascinating. I would like to ask a question, which is not so like something that, you know, everyone who listens to that lesson now basically raised and born as a Jew. So basically, my question is, what about dating? Like, what about people like me who made like conversion before and basically married someone who also like made not a conversion, but you know, Chazar b'Teshuvah, which doesn't have the minhagim. What
Okay.
do we do?
Okay, your sound quality wasn't great there, so let me just see if I've understood the question. As I understand it, your question is, what does somebody do who basically doesn't have any minhagim of their own, either conversion or somebody who's been chozeh b'teshuvah and their family don't have any minhagim? Is that your question?
That's right, thank you.
Yeah, okay. So in some ways, those people are very fortunate because they are not encumbered by any minhagim in the past. Of course, on another hand, they're very unfortunate because they don't have, sadly, any of the wonderful, long-standing minhagim and memories that we have of our Pesach. My advice to those people is to blend in with the place that they are. So, for example, if we're talking about people in Israel, people who are living in Israel, then the sensible thing, in my opinion, for those people who do not have minhagim of their own, is to take on the modern Orthodox approach of the vast majority of the Israeli, shall we say, the Israeli religious community, and to follow what we have said here on this shiur. However, if they have, if you like, converted or been chozeh b'teshuvah into Satmar Hasidim, then they will go according to the minhag of the Satmar Hasidim. So there is a principle that says al tifros min hatzibur. Don't separate yourself from the community that you're in. So if it's possible, you should try and blend in with the minhag of the people where you're living. And that was Jeffrey's point when he made it to me the other day about shouldn't we all be doing the same thing? Now, the people that you've just described don't have any tension on their side with regard to their minhagim. If they don't come along and say, well, I would blend into what everybody else is doing, except my family did it differently. They don't have any family minhagim to counterbalance. So that what they ought to do is to fall in with whatever community they have joined. So if they've joined a Sephardi community, then they should not worry about kitniyot and rice. If they've joined a Hasidic community, then they shouldn't eat matzah shruya or gebroks. And if they've joined a modern Orthodox community, they should follow the path that we've described in this shiur. So I hope that answers the question. Howard.
It was magnificent, Johnny, and no doubt one can eat potatoes for the same reason that one can eat locusts during a locust swarm, because everything else has been eaten. And no doubt my Yemeni wife, with whom I'm now culturally associated, eats rice because there were no potatoes in Yemen. There was rice in Yemen.
I think two reasons, I suppose. Number one, the Sephardim never took on the decree in the first place. If they had taken on the decree, then rice would have been excluded because of the potato situation. In other words, it was a staple. So it never actually occurred because they never took it on in the first place. But had they done, you're right. Now, what's interesting is when you have a mixed family like Howard's. Howard is a thoroughbred Ashkenazi, and his wife is Yemenite. So they have got their own beautiful shilov of minhagim. I've no doubt that Howard has a host of Eastern European minhagim that have come with him from Eastern Europe via England to Israel. And I've no doubt that his lovely wife has Yemenite minhagim which have come with her. And they now are living under the same roof, will have the same Seder night. And I, for one, would love to know how that works out together, and how that shilov, how that combination of minhagim come together. We had a situation a couple of years ago on Sukkot, where we had a whole bunch of guests. Thank God we've got a very nice big sukkah, so we always try and invite people who haven't got their own sukkah. And on the first day of Sukkot, we had a whole bunch of guests, and we had around the table 19 different nationalities around the table. And it was just wonderful to hear of all the different minhagim. Now, imagine that on Seder night, where all the minhagim are sort of even more so. It would be wonderful. So in some ways, Howard, I'm envious of your situation there, to be able to bring together two completely different elements and make what I'm sure will be a very beautiful Seder. So and the Pesach, the whole of Pesach, not just Seder. So I'm jealous of you.
I just want to add two things. One is I won't eat peanuts. And the other is I'm so grateful to you for raising Marit Ayin, because I always knew that I couldn't walk to Main Road to see Manchester City play on Shabbat, even if I had the ticket hanging around my neck. But I could never remember the expression for it. It's Marit Ayin. Thank you very much.
There's another reason you shouldn't go to Main Road as well, but then we'll not get into that.
Oh, they've moved now, that's why.
Any other questions? Yes, Marcel. Marcel, you're muted. We can't hear you.
The question of the corn, of the maize. Now, you said before, and quite rightly, you said that in our family we didn't eat corn on Pesach, but corn, the maize, the mamaliga, was the staple diet of Romania and still is, and that puzzles me a little bit. It really puzzles me. And then, just while we're talking about the corn, because you said you can have the peas and the beans in the pod, what about the corn on the cob before it's actually ground down into maize? Okay,
let me answer both of those questions. The staple diet bit, yes, I remember the mamaliga. I remember Gran making it. It was that bright yellow stuff. I remember it very well. I never liked it, to be honest. Wasn't to my taste. I wasn't allowed to say I didn't like it. I had to say I didn't care for it. Otherwise, I got in trouble from Gran for saying I didn't like it. But it wasn't to my taste. But anyway, you're right. Mamaliga, maize, was a staple diet, and as you say, it still is in Romania. However, the rabbis who excluded potatoes were not from Romania. So where they were, which is sort of the rest of Eastern Europe and Northern Europe, they excluded potatoes later on. Remember, potatoes were never in the original Gezerah. They didn't exist in the 13th century. So when potatoes did exist in the 17th century, and when the Hasidim came along, and most of Eastern Europe went Hasidic, by the 18th century, most of Eastern Europe was Hasidic. Their main staple was potato. So they said, look, we're dead poor. We can't eat anything else other than potatoes. If we take potatoes out of the diet on Pesach, we're all going to starve. It's not going to be Oneg Yom Tov, is it? We're going to have nothing to eat. So whilst you're right, and it could well be if you apply this, if you apply logic to it, you could well say that there would be another reason why Romanicians should be allowed to eat maize on Pesach. On the other hand, there'd all be Hasidim there, and they wouldn't have it at all. But you're right that in theory you're right about that being the staple. Now the second part about the corn on the cob, I suppose theoretically that would be true, because the idea is that the pea is very obviously a vegetable whilst it's in its pod, and once it comes out of its pod, it looks like a bean, etc. And I suppose logically that would be the same. Logically, you would say, well, whilst it's on the cob, it's very obviously a vegetable which has grown from the ground, which is corn and is not wheat. Although I suspect that people who won't eat corn probably won't eat corn on the cob either, because it does still look like corn, and you take it off. I'm not sure I'd be comfortable eating corn on the cob. If I had nothing else, I would. But okay, any other questions? Okay, in that case, let me stop the recording for a start. There we go.